Retro.
Hi, this is Vanessa Marshall, voice of Hera and Rook Cast, and you're listening to Dennis and Jay on Podcast Stardust. Their behavior is continually unexpected.
Welcome to Podcast Stardust. This is the fully armed and operational podcast dedicated to Star Wars news, reviews, and discussion. I'm Dennis Keithling.
And I'm Jay Krebs.
And we have a returning guest. You know him from some of our other past shows covering the High Republic, but welcome back, Greg Cass. Of course, everyone has heard you on the Roll Base Card Long Take podcast. I just found out tonight through the Glass Columns, and they can find you on Instagram as at Ion Cannon. So welcome back.
Oh, thank you so much. I'm really excited to be here. Always great to join you and talk about books as I believe I just said last time. And I think tonight we're giving, a little bit of a spotlight to something that got a bit lost in the mix back in the summer because there was so much going on, I think.
Yeah.
Indeed. I think that's very right. We're going to start October with a review of another Star Wars novel, as Greg was just teasing. And this time it is Sanctuary, a Bad Batch novel by Lamar Giles? I'm not sure how he pronounces his last name. But before we do that, Jay, why don't you go ahead and remind everybody what our social media contacts are?
Absolutely, Dennis. We are on Facebook and Instagram, very conveniently, at Podcast Stardust.
All right. The dish is aligned. The signal's boosted to maximum output. The shield is down. We are now broadcasting to the galaxy. So this is our discussion of Sanctuary, a Bad Batch novel by Lamar. I'm just going to say Giles. I'm making an executive decision here unless someone knows better. This will eventually turn into a full spoiler discussion, but I want to start things off by going around the table with our non-spoiler reactions and thoughts to this book. Greg, we'll start with you. What did you think about this one overall?
I can't immediately jump on and say like this is one of my favorite Star Wars books ever, but I do think this was a really solid episode of the Bad Batch, or maybe an arc would be more fair, a 2 or 3 episode arc. And to me, that was kind of the job that the author had, was to kind of honor the show and make those characters come alive again. And I think it's definitely successful in that. I will say, I think my kind of initial impression was very strong, and then it kind of lost me for a little while in the middle, and then the ending won me back over. So it's overall positive, though not the kind of absolutely over the top endorsement I sometimes go for.
All right. Okay. Jay, how about you?
Oh, I'm with you. And, I think it was a fun novel. And again, as you said, Greg, it's not one of my favorites, but then again, it was definitely a fun read. It was an easy read, very easy to get through. And I think you nailed it when you said it's almost like an episode of The Bad Batch in a lot of ways, but it had some really good character beats. I enjoyed a lot of there were some twists and turns that I didn't expect, and very pleasantly surprised in that way. And I thought the action was really good. There was a good balance between the action scenes and some of the more kind of tender things, I guess you could say. And some of even, once again, as clones often do, bring up ethical considerations, and just in the, also in the aftermath of what's going on in the Republic, just post Clone Wars as well. So I enjoyed it.
Mm-hmm. I liked it as well. I finished it literally yesterday. I read the first half about a month ago, and then put it aside as I was getting ready for our discussion of Trials of the Jedi, which required an entire reread before we got into that, especially since it was the last major contribution to that major publishing arc. And so I didn't get around to picking it back up. I just got busy until the past few days. And so I literally finished it for the first time yesterday. And that was a mistake because upon finishing it, as I was making my notes today, I went back and reread parts of the first half of the book. And I was like, oh, I wish I hadn't left so much time, because things that happen later in the book I would have felt that impact a lot more. And we'll get into not to be a tease, but we'll get into some of that stuff as we get through our discussion here. The other thing that stood out to me is that getting inside everybody's head on this one, especially Hunter, Wrecker, and Tech and the like, and we're used to these characters on screen. We don't get their inner monologues. We don't get their inner thoughts. And so at times seeing their frustrations, at times seeing the way Tech is thinking, especially when it comes to Phee, and the like was, and Wrecker for that part,
Yeah.
Again, I don't want to get into a specific moment, but for someone who is so physical, who is so about blowing things up, for him to be as introspective as he was in a few moments, and he was like the most minor of the clones as far as the treatment he got in this one. That was interesting. The other thing that stood out to me is, if I wasn't going to call the Bad Batch the shows PG, this is leaning closer to PG-13, I think,
Yes.
for some of the
Mhm.
content that was involved. And there was a few moments where I don't know about YouTube, but I was trying to visualize so much of this, especially in the style of the animation where things was going. I was like, I can't do that. It was getting to be rough in a few places, but at any rate, I like it. I would recommend people read it. It's not going to make necessarily my top 5, top 10 Star Wars books, but I am not disappointed overall with this one.
No, I think that's a good point about getting in their heads. That
Yeah.
was a great pull.
All right. Well, there we are. 6 minutes of the show. We've got our non-spoiler thoughts out there. So if you still haven't read this book and you don't want to be spoiled, this is the time to check out and come back later. But let's get into more of the specifics. This book takes place during season 2 of The Bad Batch. It's after the tsunami hit the island on Pabu, and Phee and the clones are out trying to raise funds so that they can help Pabu rebuild. And hijinks ensue, I guess, from there on after. So I think we kind of answered this question in our non-spoiler thoughts. And Greg, you mentioned it kind of read to you like a 2 or 3 episode story arc from the show, but you do think it works as a Bad Batch story overall.
Yeah, I definitely do. And there are a few, now that we're in spoilers, I will say, well, one surprise was that like the author really found a specific moment to set it so that we could get Tech back, which was
Mhm.
a great choice. And
Yes.
I was a little worried. I didn't mention it because in case it was a spoiler, though I recognize now, I look down and see he is on the cover. But they do find a way to get Tech back in, and he was always my favorite of the Bad Batch crew. So, it's a little bit of a shame that we missed Echo. Echo has left before the events of this book, but it is kind of very much in the spirit of the show. One of the things that I thought the show always did a good job of, and I think you alluded to this, which is like making sure that the large scale galactic politics are present and we feel how they're impacting everything. But these are not the characters at the center of that story, right? There is that one moment where Omega ended up in the Senate, but other than that, they're on the periphery, and yet we feel the effects of that. And then the other reason I would say it was a great Bad Batch is that it deepened the mythology around the broader clones, right? So much of the show was concerned with what's happening to the clones now that the army's decommissioned, and how the acts in the Senate and all of those kind of pieces about what is happening to these men who fought in this war for the Republic. And I thought the new character and the story, I'm still stepping around spoilers, but we get a new clone in a romantic relationship, and we
Mhm.
get a clone child. Sorry, the child of a clone, not a young clone. All of that felt to me like new territory, and really, in the spirit of the show.
Mhm. Mhm. I like it. Jay, what did you think?
Oh, yeah, I would echo a lot of the things that you just said, Greg. And another thing that I would build upon with that too is I just thought that Lamar Giles did a great job of staying true to who each of the characters are, but yet was able to expand on, as you said, Dennis, just some of the inner workings of them. And I think that the action was believable. Everything that was going on was something that would feel like something that the Bad Batch would do. But it also allowed for some deepening of some characters, like Omega, for example, was very much, I think, deepened. And then Wrecker was shown in a much more even tender light in a lot of ways too. So I tend to focus more on the characters themselves and the interactions with them. But I'm with you. It was so wonderful to have Tech, and it makes it even more bittersweet because he was thinking about possibly a future with Phee, and then sigh, kind of thing. But so yes, I liked it as a Bad Batch story. But what do you think, Dennis?
I'm inconsistent in my thoughts on this, to be frank with you. I feel like the early part of the book was like reading, as Greg alluded to, just, a Bad Batch script, perhaps, with the way that they staged their heist at the auction house. And then later they were at Celia's mansion on Dallow there, and, they busted out of there. But when we get into and I'm not squeamish about this, but it's just the childbirth aspects of things and some of the results of some of the violence on this, or when you have Gala or Sohi, that character constantly overdosing herself with stems so that she can walk and run, stuff like that, is like, that's when I was talking about in the non-spoiler, or in the spoiler, in the non-spoiler, I was confusing myself, portion of the discussion. That's not stuff I necessarily think we would expect to see in the show, which kind of edged it past what we are used to on that type of a PG rating into a PG-13. Does it make sense? Oh, absolutely. But, when Sohi is reflecting on that before scene, when Sendril Crane has welcomed her back from a mission and she's covered in blood, and, she's dealing with the trauma of the mission she's gone on, and he's offering her food and she's like, "You expect me to eat like this?" And her hands covered in blood, and all he can do is offer her gloves. It's just so to pull back, I don't need a G-rated Star Wars. I don't need a PJ-rated Star Wars, but for something that is a spin-off from the Bad Batch, I just felt like this took it to maybe outside of that intended audience for the Bad Batch a little bit in that regard. But it didn't make it any worse of a novel. It just kind of defied my expectations that way, I think.
No, I think that's a good thing to point out, quite honestly. And because Sendril was very brutal with Gala / Sohi. And, it reminded me somewhat of, when Saw was training Jin and reading Rebel Rising by Beth Revis, and some of the things that Jin had to go through as well. And even that wasn't as brutal as what this was.
Yeah, that's true. That's true. So there's so much to discuss about this book. I'm going to try and avoid going as long as we did on Trials of the Jedi, because that discussion was just epic. But the auction, this just grabbed me from the get-go. They're at this auction in the Pipru auction house on Hosnian Prime. So cool, neat little canon reference there with Hosnian Prime. And we've got Hunter working in the kitchen, being very frustrated while he's peeling Jogan fruit, and a droid is lecturing about how bad a job he's doing at it. Omega is serving drinks, and Wrecker's a valet. Phee and Tech are pretending to be married bidders on an artifact that the Cellia Moten, that we'll discuss here in a bit, is once. And they've got this scheme where Phee's droid, Mel 222, is created a siphon where it's going to take the siphon off the credits from the various bidders so that they can use to bid on this item and then sell it to Cellia, except for it all goes wrong and it keeps stealing too many credits to the point that it completely wrecks their plan. And along the way, they have to make their escape. That we meet a baby Gundark. They nicknamed Teacup, which I thought was absolutely adorable. And they ultimately make their escape from all of this. And Greg, when you talked about this being a story arc, yeah, I was like, I could see 24 minutes on this. But what was your reaction to the auction house heist?
Yeah, this would be my favorite part of the novel, I think. I mean, there's some pretty epic stuff late in it, but to me, it really read like Mission Impossible back before Mission Impossible was like jumping out of planes and flying and stuff. But like a team on a mission undercover in these roles, kind of putting all these pieces of the heist together. And I thought it was really fun. And I forgot to mention, so I read this when it came out in a hardcover book. And then to prepare for this show, I listened to it. And he always deserves our praise, but Mark Thompson, really gets into the clone voices really nicely. Maybe
Mhm.
not Omega, but that's a tougher job. I'll just, he missed a
It is.
couple times, but I couldn't do better, certainly. And he actually does a pretty good Wanda Sykes for Phee Genoa.
Yes,
So
he does.
yeah, which that, again, very hard. So definitely succeeded, even if I'm a little critical. But I thought the listening to this really made it even more sound like, a movie, even like an Ocean's 11 or something, where you have all these pieces at work, and you kind of know it will go wrong somewhere, and then when it eventually does, you watch all the pieces fall down and then slowly come back together to get everybody away. But I had a lot of fun with this, and I just want to make sure I weigh in because Jay mentioned it too. The little extra sauce on the flirtation between Tech and Phee really worked well for me too, and maybe that is pushing a little in a different way towards a PG-13, that they can make that a little more surface. And it was really fun to have this kind of heist going wrong, and still a couple extra little words or glances flirting with each other. It was really fun.
Mhm,
Oh,
mhm.
yeah.
What'd you think, Jay?
Yeah, I enjoyed it. It did a good job of balancing the action with, some of the humor, and you could, as I was listening to it as well, Greg, I was kind of cringing here and there, like, "Oh no, that just happened. Oh gosh, did that really? Oh man." And then but the next thing you know, they're pulling it off and they're able to, to get out of there basically. But I just thought it was a really fun way to show how they are so able to work as a team, which we know obviously, but just the wheels, all the different cogs in the wheel kind of thing. And it was just a lot of fun.
Mhm. So points to you, Greg, for bringing up Ocean's 11, one of my all-time favorites. Love that movie.
Beautiful.
And two, yeah, I really enjoyed this scene. It was like I mentioned just a second ago. It stood out to me as something that would have been so beautifully animated in an episode of The Bad Batch, and it's kind of a shame we didn't get to see it that way. But and kudos to Lamar Giles for Giles. I'm inconsistent. I'm gonna have to look up now how to pronounce this man's name, and I apologize that I didn't get correct the first time for capturing something that's so in the spirit of the Bad Batch. Because as his only other Star Wars work is one of the stories he wrote from a certain point of view, and so to knock it out of the park with his capturing the tone this way was really fantastic. So, okay, we danced around it enough. Phee and Tech in this one. I'm with you, Greg, and Jay knows how salty I got after they killed off Tech at the end of season
Mm.
2 of the Bad Batch. He was my favorite. I just loved how matter of fact he was, and that show when dealing with the rest of them. And he really didn't put up with anything from anybody. He just kind of rolled with everything that happened. And one of the scenes that always stood out to me was when he was talking to Omega, and she was upset with him because he wasn't taking Crosshair's defection more personally. And then he told her, is like, although I don't agree with him, he made his choice. I must respect it. And although I am not demonstrating emotion, and this is a terrible paraphrasing, but he's like, I do feel it. And that to me was like one of the epitome of tech scenes throughout the Bad Batch. And this book did a very good job with that. He's very analytical about his feelings, and there's opportunity that he has with Phee is like intriguing to him. But if he's got a weakness, he just does not know how to really proceed with this. But he's figuring it out, and she seems very amused by that, and just to like encourages him and gives him his space to let those things develop. And I don't want to steal all the points here before I even ask you two about this, but to me, it just kind of highlights the tragedy that when he perishes at the end of the season, we don't ever really get a good reaction from Phee about this and
Mhm.
Mm.
what this all meant to her. Anyways, with all that having been said, Greg, your turn. What do you think about Phee and Tech?
Yeah, I would actually even double up what you just said, that, I can't say I've rewatched Bad Batch many times. It has a warm place in my heart because it is the first show I ever covered on Rebel Base Card with Greg. So it's kind of central to my most recent phase of fandom. but I haven't returned to it a lot. But to my memory, Phee disappears much more than I expected her to when it comes to the third season, right? They check in on Pabu a lot, but the story gets so much bigger with Omega's capture and then her rescue and all those pieces. So I was feeling the real loss for both of them. I mean, Tech definitely has that like I'm a cop one day away from retirement feel in the book, and it's too bad that we never get to see those stories, but I do think it would only heighten if I were to rewatch that death episode because I know about that. And I do agree very much with what you're saying, that, you know, the beauty of Tech, I think, as a character, among many things, was that he was, you know, coldly rational and always calculating in a kind of in a neutral way, not even a planning diabolical way, but just like looking at the variables, making the best choice, even down to his sacrifice when he does eventually fall. Sorry, that's a little bit of a pun. Um, but when that moment you mentioned, it is that gap between what we're able to see on screen and that interiority. And I do think, you know, I'm not a veteran, I'm not a soldier, but that's how I understand so much of the veteran experience, that they had to kind of detach themselves and have interior self and follow orders on the outside, and that gap can really be hard for veterans to deal with. So I'm glad Tech continues to represent that here, and we do see, you know, yes, he can be coldly rational, but he can also in his heart be deeply irrational and want to hide away on Pabu and flirt with, I was going to say Wanda, with Phee, and enjoy a life there. And the last piece I'll say is it also made me then think about the very end of the show, where we get the coda, that the end of the Bad Batch is mostly to live out a long time period in on Pabu, right? They do make a home there eventually, from what we can tell. And boy, would Tech have enjoyed that life, right? It's like
Hmm.
sad that the rest of them do get to eventually retire there, and we don't quite get to get that storybook ending for the couple.
Hmm. Hmm.
Yeah, makes it even more sad. It really does.
Hmm. Jay, what did you think about that?
Well, as far as Tech and Fee goes, like I was saying, they really are, kind of at the odd couple, I guess you could say. I mean, you've got Tech, who's super analytical and he's logical. He's very socially awkward, and Fee, on the other hand, she seems very independent, resourceful, but yet she's attracted to Tech. I think maybe because they're just two weird puzzle pieces that kind of oddly fit together, kind of thing. And so when they interact, it's kind of this blend of Tech's geeky, methodical approach and Fee's, no nonsense attitude, but yet there's some humor there. And I think that it's awesome the way that, again, as you pointed out, Dennis, that inner voice comes out, because you see a softer side in Tech that we don't always see. His genuine concern for safety of the baby, and and other children, which Fee obviously appreciates. And what I loved about it, though, was that their interactions didn't feel forced. They were small but meaningful moments that really added, I think, just a lot of heart without overshadowing the bigger plot. And I just really appreciated that. And I just thought that they had such a fun little chemistry together. But I do appreciate also the fact that, as kind of a Tech character study, there was one point in the novel where he's analyzing the fighting style of his opponent, and his opponent was very much underestimating him, and because he's like, "Oh, you're the brains of the group," and Tech's like, "Oh, but the thing of it is that we're good at everything." And so he was doing all of these different moves and then integrating his own style as well. And I was just like, dude, he's brains and he's brawn, just like the rest of the Bad Batch. But it's like that was such a cool moment. That's probably one of my favorite Tech moments in the whole book.
That was a fantastic one, for sure, for sure.
What do you think, Dennis?
I mean, I pretty much said what I had to say
Yeah.
about Fee and Tech at the beginning of this, and it
Hmm.
just made me miss Tech all the much more. That
Yes.
scene that you highlighted was really great, and I think it put an exclamation point on what we know about the Bad Batch, which was they yes, they all have their specialties, but they're also really good at a whole bunch of things. And so, this, he went into that fight Perrin, I think is the character's name, and he's like, you've miscalculated things. It's you just basically read my file and realized that I'm the tech guy, and you assumed that I wasn't good at anything else. But the truth is, we are good at everything here. And he's mastered all these different forms of fighting, like 16 different forms. He's getting ready to master his 17th. I can't remember what the exact count was, and then he lets him have it. And very, very cool scene. That's one of the things that Lamar, I'm not going to say his last name because now it's becoming a bit whether I can pronounce his last name or not. He did such a great job of kind of capturing the spirit of the Bad Batch there.
Mm-hmm. Totally.
Well, let's turn to Hunter here for a bit. He is struggling a little bit in this book, and he kind of gets his feelings hurt a little bit when he realizes that there is this issue that he's used to military hierarchy, and he's used to military planning and operational security and leading his team and making best decisions for the teams. But then I think resentment might be too strong a word, but there is some discontentment maybe from the team over the fact that he's kind of just making decisions for them without necessarily consulting them, that he's making decisions for the group as opposed to decisions for the individual here. And this is something that he kind of struggles with over the course of the book. Plus the fact he's got this former separatist spy who's responsible for the death of countless clones, and Phee kind of let that slip without doing all necessary background work on here. And so he's got some issues here. But Greg, what did you think about Hunter and what he was going through here?
Yeah, I think struggle was the right word for it. So, so many times on the Bad Batch, he really is on the Bad Batch, the show. He's trying to be the commander in a situation that can no longer have a commander. And I, again, thought that Lamar Giles, I'll go Giles, kept the right tone here. That was where Hunter was, particularly at this moment in the show's arc, right? I think after Omega kind of gets back to them, he changes a little more. Again, the resolution of the series is him kind of being okay with Omega going out to save the galaxy this time, right? And letting her go. But we're so far from that here. And I thought, it was funny because sometimes I think readers, and maybe this comes from students I listen to, students will say writing is bad if they dislike a character in their choices. But I'm like, well, sometimes it's just a character being very real. And that's how I'd characterize Hunter here. He really annoyed me at times, yet I understood why he was making those arguments. And reporting to a pirate to go on missions is so much different than the old hierarchy of the military. And there's the whole thing where we know the clones were kind of on the wrong side, but fighting for good and fighting for a cause is a lot different than where he finds himself now. And as you alluded to, there can just not be at all the level of control that he seeks. I would say my favorite part about his arc in this book would be, it's a thin line sometimes for him to go from commander to father of the Bad Batch family. But when we get the switch and Punter, gosh, it's hard sometimes to tell the difference when the names are said on the audiobook, I will admit. But when it's revealed that it's a clone behind the mask, and it's almost instantaneous, it feels like, that he pulls him in and is like, okay, brother, you're part of the family now, and let's figure that out. And so that was the piece that felt very true to Hunter for me.
Mm-hmm. And Jay, what about you?
Yeah, I mean, for Hunter, he obviously had a big protective instinct front and center at the very beginning. And he did eventually have that character arc, I think, throughout this whole thing. And as you said, Greg, we're a long way from the very end where Omega ends up going, off on her own. But I think one of the big themes with Hunter is how this mission affects him even emotionally. It allows him to understand that it's not just about survival or strategy. It's about protecting a future, not just his own future with the members of the Bad Batch and on Pabu, but also the future of his other brothers. And in this case, it's this new clone, that comes out of this particular story. But he's his usual aggressive self, but he also has this strong sense of right and wrong. And I think it's particularly important because they operate in this very complicated galaxy. And so he's almost the moral center of the team in a lot of ways, too. So I think he's walking that fine line between, as you mentioned, the father figure of the group, and then just also kind of relinquishing some of that control and actually building a community, building a family, and building that future.
Mhm. To me, one of the strengths of this book was Hunter's inner monologue here, because I often felt like in The Bad Batch, he was the stoic. He's the one that we really had a hard time understanding what he was thinking, what he was feeling the most. Tech just comes out and tells you. Wrecker is so bombastic. Crosshair was bitter, cynical, broken. Echo was pragmatic. He wanted to go work with
Right.
Commander Cody,
Oh,
Cody
Cody.
and Rex and them. He wanted to be part of that mission there. But Hunter was like almost the character you could project what you wanted to on him, because he was kind of stoic in here. But in this, he mentioned, and this is one of the things I was alluding to earlier with it was a mistake to put so much time between reading the first half of this book and the second half of this book, because he has, it says very early on about when he sleeps and he dreams, he thinks about Crosshair and he dreams about the fallen Jedi. And then later in this book, he has that dream where he's sitting on the nose of the Marauder while they're in hyperspace, and he's having that very touching conversation with Crosshair. And just when he decides to tell Crosshair that he misses him, he wakes up from the dream.
Yeah.
And, he also has this desire to settle down, that if they can't have this operational security, if they can't have the comforts of operating the way they used to with the military support and stuff like that, retire to Babu. But Omega is not seeing the galaxy. In contrast, she spent a huge chunk of her life in a lab on Camino, and she wants to go everywhere and experience everything. And so he's got to try and reconcile all these different desires here. And it's tough for him. And I do feel for him, because he's got everyone's best interest in heart. But I think where he comes up short is that sometimes he feels like he knows better for them, and he's having a harder time kind of taking into account that these are all people capable of making their own decisions.
Yeah. But that's what dads do, you know?
Don't I know it?
Well, and Hunter and Fee's conflict, it's great in the way you're describing, because neither of them is wrong, right?
Right.
It's just they
Mhm.
understand the situation much differently, and are both arguing for the best interest of the group, even though that's very different at times.
Indeed.
Mhm.
Okay, so we've got several new characters in this book. Let's start off with Sohi, aka Gala, and Ponder, aka Kuto. And so is it Sohi or Sohi? What did they say in the audiobook?
So high.
Sohi?
Hi.
Okay.
Yeah.
Mhm.
Yeah. I didn't listen to the audiobook yet. That's on my list of things to do at some point in the future. But these two, so we got Sohi. So she's a Kashiri. And I don't know if Greg, you're a big reader. I don't know how much of Legends you've read, but the Kashiri were very important as a species in Legends, because they were kind of part of carrying on the legacy of the Sith. I mean, they debuted in
Mhm.
the Lost Tribe of the Sith by John Jackson Miller, and then they were huge in the Fate of the Jedi novel series. And it completely escaped me that we had actually met one in canon, and that was Chell, or also known as Fret in the Jedi Battle Scars novel. I just assumed she was a purple person. I didn't put two and two together as to who she was. But so she is this humanoid alien, a Kashiri. She's got purple skin, but she was brought in by Sendril Crane and trained as a spy and sent out on all kinds of brutal missions. And then she was working for the Senate, sending information back to separatists, was partly responsible for countless clones being killed. And then she met Ponder, who is a clone who was damaged when his transport got shut down. He lost a leg, it had it replaced. He also took some shrapnel to the head, which deactivated his clone chip. The two fell in love. He was advocating for clone rights and various bills that were going through the Senate that involved Padme, of all people. And so she left the service, and they've been on the run ever since. They robbed a casino on Canto Bight and stole a whole bunch of marked credits. And Phee has set up a job where they're going to pick them up on the Aegito and give them transport eventually to Felucia there. And she is very, very pregnant in this, which we've kind of mentioned early on. Complicated characters, I think, here. What did you think about these two?
Yeah, I mean, that was such an incredibly long history you just recounted that made me reminded me, like, how detailed that is. And really fascinating. And the other thing that came to mind as you were giving that description is clearly, we're firing on all parts of canon and legends, as you alluded to, right? But the fact, you already mentioned Hosnian Prime, and then the casino they rob is Canto Bite. So we've got sequels, we've got Padme and the prequels and the Separatists and so on. So it's really impressive how much they folded into there. Um, this character struck me, it felt very much like Marvel's Black Widow character, or any of the Black Widows from that kind of training school, right? Trained to be a spy, trained to here. It seems like this is a smaller operation, but I think there's a lot of fun in imagining that history, and we only get a few flashbacks that really show some of the training and some of the missions. But then the next level of kind of somebody embedded in, the Senate itself and feeding intelligence and then getting won over. I mean, it's like we've got all of Alias, the television show, and then we've got The Americans, the television show. Like, it's all these different, like, could be their own stories layered together. And I really liked her because I think this was really an invention that was totally unlike any other character I could at least think of. We've had spies before, but this felt like a different level to it. And then I don't know, I'm sounding too mushy tonight, but I really liked the idea that she would fall in love with a clone and kind of abandon that life and see the error of her ways, and really try to get out and start a new life. And so really appealing. I don't think Ponder, I keep getting it wrong. Ponder did quite as much for me, because I think, the hidden identity and the revelation was really fun, but it meant we didn't spend that much time getting to know him in his alias. But I loved that that Sohi was very steely too, and was never letting Hunter get away with calling her by her other name. So right till the end, I believe. So yeah, it was all really interesting. And I try to appreciate how hard it must be for these authors to invent something new in Star Wars. And I think she is a really new invention.
Mm-hmm. Jay, what did you think about these two?
Yeah, and I love the fact that, as you pointed out, that Gala slash Sohai, she could have to be soft at times because obviously she was becoming a mother, but yet she had to really, as you said, be very steely and just be able to cut herself off basically from her own humanity and to be able to carry on whatever she needed to do. And she was so adept at hand to hand combat, and she was such an amazing pilot, and she had all of this different kind of knowledge, and it actually kind of struck me in a way that she's very similar, and bear with me here, to someone like Mara Jade, who was trained as an assassin, who was basically, and you said it, Greg, kind of like a Black Widow sort of thing. But I think it just goes to show that, even though you are raised and basically brainwashed to be a killer, you can still find empathy, you can find compassion, you can find love. And it took, even though she had worked, as a spy and had taken down so many clones, it was when she came face to face with one of them that she realized how much of an impact all of her other things made, because everybody else was faceless. This was not a faceless person, even though all the clothes looked alike, of course. But yeah, so and I'm mushy too. I love me a good love story, and I think that this actually worked. I mean, they even referenced Cut LaQuaine in this as well, and Sue, and that these clones were able to choose a different path. And again, that's kind of where Tech was like, wonder if maybe I could do this as well, kind of thing. So yeah, so I really liked that whole relationship, and I liked how it played out. And I liked Gala slash Sohai. I thought she was a cool character.
Yeah. Yeah, you guys both made excellent points, and I'm going to skip a lot of what I was going to say for the sake of time here, but um, to me, what Sohai was is that she was the element of the story that really brought into sharp focus the what Hunter needs to confront, which is that here's someone that he didn't get to run a background check. There's no operational security here, but they've got a plight. It is about coming to understand someone who might have been an enemy in a past life, but they've been manipulated as well, just the same way the Bad Batch was. A lot of opportunities for self-realization. Jay, I just couldn't. I thought for sure you were going to bring up Republic Commando with Karen Travis and how there was a clone who had a child in that
Oh
series
yeah.
year, and so that's what we got with Sohai here, having a child with Ponder in
I'm
this
glad you brought
situation,
that up.
and it ultimately does not matter. But I was just really, really curious how this child turned out as being part Kashiri, part
Me
human
too.
clone. And
Yeah.
they never gave us any detail on that. It's just that, the only thing they told us about Koru, the little girl's name, is that, she would grab Wrecker's finger, or she sensed that it was time to be quiet, and that, those type of things. But any real physical appearance stuff, they left to our imagination, which was an interesting choice on that. It's impossible to talk about these two without also talking about Sendril Crane here. And so he was this former separatist spy master, now an ISB agent, which just tells you how fluid everything was after the end of the Clone Wars. And he is obsessed with finding Sohai and re-educating her and putting her skills to use in the way he envisioned. I'm not entirely certain that it mattered to him that she came over to the Empire and was an ISB agent. It's just that he wanted to exert some sort of control over what he felt like he created in this situation. But what's your
Mhm.
take on Sendril, Greg?
I thought a lot about director Krennic, right? Because Crane was similarly stuck in the ineffective middle, right? He's not out with the freedom that a low level agent might have, and he doesn't have the power and control that a administrator might have. A Tarkin would, for example, or a Yularen who makes a brief hologram appearance here. So I liked him, and I think you just said it exactly right. This was about reclaiming one of his toys in a very petulant way. It wasn't about what secrets might be lost or about recruitment or anything like that. It was, it was personal. It was she should not be allowed to escape my control. And I think that's a familiar type in a lot of like spy novels, right? The spy master who wants complete control over all this. And actually, in the Black Widow movie, there was kind of that figure too. The guy from Crystal Skull, that actor, but I don't remember his character name in that movie. So I thought it worked, and I particularly liked I kind of when it got too far into his plot line, I kind of got a little bored. That's where it kind of lagged a little for me. But once he ran afoul of the Death Star project and is getting extreme pressure from above and is suddenly on calls with very important people, that really perked me up and made me, kind of tune in a little better. So I thought that was the best part of his plot line in many ways for me.
Good call. Jay?
Yeah, Sandral is I don't like him. Let's just put
Yeah.
it that way. I thought, which honestly, though, to Lamar Giles's credit, that's the point. And so I think just the fact that every time he would come into play, either on the audiobook or just part of the story itself, I was just like, I don't like you. And I think a lot of it has to do with the fact that that father-daughter framing that he used is not nurturing or protective in any way. It's controlling, it's manipulative. And, it's just basically a means of asserting control over Gala and, basically saying that it's like, her identity and agency is gone because he's, wrapping this all up into this language of kinship and trying to get her to be, more apt to want to go back to him because of that. And that just made me cringe, which again is a great thing because I mean they did their job in this book. He made a perfect ISB agent. I mean that was ISB agents are just classic for being very emotionally detached and just brutal in that way. And he was very intelligent in a lot of ways as well. But yeah, I mean, I definitely love-hate relationship with him for sure.
Yeah, I was
Right.
not sorry to see him get his comeuppance on that factory and
Yeah.
Trith, where that.
Oof,
And
yeah,
as an aside, that world, which is based around mercury mining,
yeah.
was fascinating. It just that was clever coming up with something there.
Mhm.
You have these mercury geysers and mercury being mined out of planets, and it's everywhere. And then you've got the other child of Sendril, Jadal Amstock, who's the medic who he realizes that he has to turn Sohi in, because if he doesn't and Sendril tracks him down, then the whole town will get wiped out. So we're going to go long, so I will just put him aside for now. But at any rate, watching Sindril get his comeuppance when he's thrown into that vat of mercury was quite satisfying. But that being said, he wasn't even the character I liked the least in this book. That honor goes to Celia Moten here. And I mean, I think where she completely lost me is where she's trying to have this conversation with Sindril, which, by the way, Sindril is such a good Star Wars name. But when she's trying to have this conversation with Sindril about, if you were a deity of some sort, what would you be? And she is like this goddess of control or whatever like this. And she's going on to make this point about how her grandmother once told her that they're people that matter and they're people that don't. And she's one of the ones that matters. And so she has no compunctions about disposing of anybody. Okay. And so I just spit out everything I didn't like about her. But to more accurately talk about her, she is this, I don't know exactly how to describe her. And, she's kind of a socialite. She's got status. She knows Sheev Palpatine and isn't afraid to throw around his first name. And all of the upper echelon of the Imperial crust know who she is. And when they hear her name, or she sticks her head into a holo discussion, they're like, okay, well, Sindril, make sure you look out for her. That's of utmost priority. And she even takes control and disposes of Sindril's ISB unit as they're trying to do their job on all this. And her desire is to become an imperial governor. And we'll get into her fate in a second. That's another conversation which deserves its own 5 minutes here. But I've kind of set the table a little bit on Celia. Greg, talk to me about her. What'd you think?
I thought she was great and terrible, and it was her what it made her terrible that made her great. And I do agree that between my two readings, I chiefly remembered her as that kind of if this was an 80s frat movie, she'd be the country club lady, right? The smoothie who, it cares too much about status and power, and the way she throws around Sheev's name so often just felt like that kind of person drunk on their own social connections and power. And again, I'm always staring lovingly at the Last Jedi poster over your shoulder, Dennis, and made me think about that movie made out this other group of villains, right, who are the ones who sell them arms to both sides, and she's of that ilk and feels that power and is able to kind of track things. She's a capitalist run amok, and yet I think, in a world where we're all questioning billionaires and what should we have billionaires and how much power should we give billionaires, I think to then give this one an extra psychosis of she thinks she's an actual deity. And, if you got to a certain level of power and wealth, I can imagine feeling that way and ascribing to that narrative that you're one of the few who matters and the others don't. And so all of that just made her feel horribly realistic and disgustingly possible, and yet new, right? A different type of villain. And I think because, she sounds like the person who never gets in trouble because they have friends in the right places. When she really gets in trouble, it's so satisfying.
It is. It really is. Jay?
Yes, I don't know if either of you watched The Hunger Games, but she just reminded me of a crazy version of Effie Trinket.
Yeah,
She's
right.
she's got this extreme bizarre aesthetic kind of thing. I could just picture her saying, "That is mahogany," kind of thing. But she's got extreme cruelty couched in these bizarre aesthetics. I mean, she's got a grove in her backyard where she buries her enemies. Who does that, kind of thing? But she's very unhinged. And she's another one that, yeah, I'm with you, Dennis. She was very unlikable, and she was very entitled in a lot of ways, but everybody knew her, like everybody knew her. And I don't know if they kept, it's kind of like, keep your friends close and your enemies closer kind of thing. So I don't know. She's got this entitlement, but she also has actual ability and resources. And that's what makes her so dangerous. And in the
Mhm.
end, it was nice to see her get her comeuppance as well.
Yeah, she's kinda like the ultimate Star Wars Karen, when it came
Yeah.
down to it, just throwing Sheev's name around the way that she did.
Right.
And it's more than that, though. Again, it was just the disposability of everybody when it came to her.
Yeah.
And,
Mhm.
when she's on her ship, which is a Sarasub luxury yacht, which was also Lando's ship, and she's got the ISB agents, except for Sendril, on their ship, and she has created this or ordered a malfunction in their hyperdrive, which kills all of them. And she's just telling Sendril casually, it's like, oh, it's just too bad that we were not near a comm station or whatever it was, so that the hyperspace defect in the thing could have been reported before it blew up, and right before the ship blows up. And then later it's she's working Sendrils, like she stumbled upon all of these receipts from these different places that are leading to some gigantic project, and look into that for me, Willie. I mean, just completely taking over systems and whatever. Not that I love the Empire, but just this manipulation of everything, and then throwing Shee's name around like she's asking for the manager.
Right.
Again, to get back to my Karen reference here, which just makes her so unbearable. But as you both teased, and you both did a great job with your references to the country club hostess and Effie from the Hunger Games. I didn't see the movies, but I read the books. But she pushes too far. And Sindril runs up against a wall when he starts reporting these inquiries uh, from Celia. And then at the end of this book, they're leaving the planet, and they're met in space by an Imperial Star Destroyer. And she's like, oh, it's too late. Now they show up. She's all disgusted because they didn't show up. But then a shuttle docks with it, and I can't do as good a job as the book did, so I'm going to dispense with the suspense, which is Darth Vader comes aboard, has a great hallway scene, wipes out her henchmen, and then basically tells her, I am what you have wrought, and lets her know that her inquiries into this were not welcome, shows her a holo of all the places that she was inquiring about now are in ruins, and now she's going to have to pay. What else do you know? And then I think it says like Celia never knew Darth Vader's name before she perished. So, okay, before I say anything else, I want to get your all's reactions to that scene. Greg?
Loved it. I don't know if I just had a terrible memory or if I somehow wasn't paying attention when I read the book. This totally shocked me in the audiobook this past week because I was like, I didn't remember Vader showing up at all. And it is very much just like the ending of Rogue One, right? Like one ship, and you think it's all over, and surprise. But I did really also love how much it made me think about Andor, right? And like, to keep a secret as big as the Death Star, you have to tie up every one of these ends in exactly this way. And of course, it would be Vader. And the audiobook, again, does a lovely job of just giving you a little bit of the Darth Vader breathing, right? Just enough to really make you picture it. And it was really, really fun. And I do like that last note. We talked about, I should keep it vague. We talked about some character endings being very poetic at the end of High Republic. And this is another one, because all she wanted to do was know. That's all she wanted to do, was to steal the Hamilton line. She wanted to be in the room where it happens, right? She wanted to
Right.
be in that inner circle.
Mhm.
And here at the very end, she stumbles upon the biggest secret there is and doesn't even get to know who it is that kills her. And it was really poetic and wonderful for such a disgusting character.
I love that. Yeah, and I'll say that the audiobook, I almost wish that I would have not been listening to the audiobook during this particular scene, because the book itself did such a good job of giving you little breadcrumbs like the Crimson Blade, and because I was thinking to myself, gosh, this could have potentially been one of the first Inquisitors. But you get that breathing in the audiobook, so it was kind of a spoiler from that point on that it was going to be Darth Vader, because I think had I not been listening to it, my brain might have entertained some other types of outcomes there, which is kind of fun in and of itself. But yeah, the hallway scene, Dennis, you put it very, very well. I mean, that's definitely what this was, and just knowing how brutal Anakin/Vader can be is just, oh, wow. Whew.
So, okay, I like the scene, and I've had time to think about it. I decided I like it, and I really think Lamar did a great job setting it up. As you pointed out, Jay, in the book you don't have the breathing and stuff like that, but you get the breadcrumbs. Is very well put. This huge hulking figure, dark figure behind the door, and then they comes through and everything he's doing, and then it's revealed that it's Darth Vader. But it's Darth Vader before you finally ever get the name Darth Vader in the book, and I thought that was really well done. And I sat up very straight when I read this, and I was excited about it. But then I thought about it, I was like, are they going to this well a little too often? And is my thing, and I'm not just talking about Darth Vader in this role. It is the Death Star being in the background of all of these stories between Revenge of the Sith and A New Hope. I don't know. I guess after thinking about it, it's like, I guess it doesn't really bother that much because it wasn't such a key part of this overall story. It was a subplot to what was going on. But if this had all been around that, I think it would just kind of like, it's like the way that so many of the shows on Disney Plus revolve around one character protecting a child, whether it's Obi-Wan Kenobi and Leia, the Mandalorian and Grogu, what we're being teased with Star Wars Starfighter, and the like, all these instances of an adult protecting a child and like that. It's just kind of there are other story ideas available to you in this regard. But like I said, I think I've come down that I think they did it in just the right dosage here without making it the central theme of the story. But what do you two? Am I overreacting, or what do you think?
I wouldn't say overreacting. To me, I think what you're discussing is really just emblematic of how, since the canon reset, we've had periods where we get stuck somewhere. And it, like, the first thing was between A New Hope and Empire Strikes Back. And it was like, oh my God, there's not a free minute now for any other stories to be told. And so I do think we've been in a moment where we're kind of stuck between, in the biggest gap in canon between those two. I guess maybe between Return of the Jedi and Force Awakens is a little bigger now. But I do think, if you're telling a story in that time period, you almost have to hint at what's happening with the Empire. And then while there's this, really big threat of tyranny in this world, I think, our sci-fi wants to tell stories about our world. And so it naturally goes to some of those stories. So I would not say you're overreacting. I think you're accurate that there's been a lot of it lately. But, that to me is always the reason why I just hope the canon keeps spreading out and filling in 20,000 years ago and 1,000 years in the future. I want to go everywhere to help avoid some of those problems of too much of one time period.
Jay?
I don't think it was too overdone. I mean, it didn't bother me because it is a huge project, and it is basically what the entire culmination of what Palpatine was working towards was building this ultimate super weapon. So of course it's always going to be sort of looming in the background somewhere. So I guess the wink and the nod, I know it was a little more than a wink and the nod than in this particular book, but I thought it was okay. It didn't bother me at all. And because yeah, I mean that's what A New Hope is all about, is destroying it. And it is a huge project. So it's understandable that it would kind of have its tendrils everywhere, so to speak.
Yeah. And again, it was beyond just the Death Star. It was the way that Vader was used. He shows up, as Greg alluded to, in the hall and Rogue One. And then, I'm thinking of Jedi Fallen Order, the way he shows up there. And, he kind of comes in from behind at the end of stories and wipes out people because they know too much or whatever. And so it was like, this is that again. And like I said, ultimately it's fine. It wasn't about that. It's not, he didn't have a scene where he was force choking Sendril Crane earlier in the book, the way he did Director Krennic in the middle of Rogue One and the like. So like I said, I don't want to make too much of it, but just kind of like this seems like a lot of familiar beats that we get a lot of those stories. And if it hadn't been from all those other stories, this would have been like super amazing and unique. But again, it's something that we've seen a number of times before. But enough of that. One last thing to touch on before we wrap it up, and that is the conclusion. You know, everyone gets away. Sohi, after being touch and go, looks like she's going to pull through, and now it's up for Hunter to finally give them forgiveness and suggest that they find a home on Pabu there. And he makes mention that it felt good to actually be able to do that, to forgive somebody, which was a neat, nice touch there. And one of the things I was talking about earlier, where I wish I hadn't waited a month between reading the first half and the second half, is when Omega and Phee and Wrecker are sitting around and they got something that only Hunter can take care of, and it was peeling the Jogan fruit like he did at the beginning of the book, so they could make dinner. Coupled with, and this warmed my heart, was Phee talking, the observation she makes, where these are soldiers and they're violent men, but they're like the most gentle people that she knows in the galaxy. And if she were to give up this life of piracy that she's involved in, and then just kind of trails off that thought there. But just that observation she made, just the family atmosphere that they have on their ship. Really fantastic, warm ending to the book. But any thoughts there on the conclusion?
I loved the ending a lot. I liked that, when the fates of so many characters, I often kind of default to, well, they're not going to make it if we don't know them. But, I like the idea that in those later, the last season, they could be just off camera, right? Like playing under a different tree in Pabu, perhaps. So I thought that all really worked nicely. And then the specifics of what you're talking about, I just go back to me, that is just this theme across all the story of Clone Force 99, where they're the defects and their differences are what make them great. And that theme running even to here, right? That they aren't just going to follow orders. They are going to be real, kind, compassionate, men. And I do think, that's not to say every single other clone is not going to be that way, but I do think it's part of the unique path they took, and due to their defects, quote unquote, that got them here. So it was a nice bow on the end of it, and made only a little bit sadder knowing all that's still to come, particularly to Tech, of course, as we mentioned.
Mhm. No, I like that you pointed out that full circle moment, Dennis, because it does wrap things up very nicely. And again, the idea of family coming out of this. And I love the fact that Wrecker kept calling Koru his niece, because I just thought that that was super cool, because obviously they looked at Ponder as a brother. And so, that underlying message, once again, of family. I mean, Star Wars is always about family in some way, shape, or form, and families that can overcome their strife, their differences, their struggles, and this is definitely one of those. And Omega really shined as well with her knowledge of, clone physiology, and being able to step in both during the childbirth and very soon after was very cool. I love that too. And it just makes me want more stories of Pabu, even if it's comics, that we could get a couple of arcs in a series that would explore some of the goings on Pabu. I think that'd be a lot of fun.
Indeed. All right. Well, that's it. That is Sanctuary, Bad Batch novel. That was fun. I'm not exactly sure where this conversation was going to go when I sat down to put my notes, but I'm really liked that we had an opportunity to talk about this. That's one of the things about discussing these books, is I enjoy them, but I enjoy them so much more after I've had an opportunity to talk about them and dive into the details and just have that shared experience. So, Greg, thank you so much for joining us for this. You've been on the show a couple times this year, and it's always great to have you back. You want to remind everybody what your contacts are, where they can find you, and everything you're up to.
Well, as always, an absolute pleasure. And I do think I was actually, just before you said it, Dennis, thinking in my head, like, wow, maybe I liked this book a lot more than I thought I did, and that there's more there. And I do think it's a real treat when we get to sit down and unpack something together and hear other people's perspectives and insights. So I hope listeners enjoy it as much as I did as I sat here and participated. So people can find me generally online at Ion Cannon, EYEONCANON, on Instagram and Letterboxd primarily are my social medias these days. And then I will mention, it is funny, I've never mentioned it before, but I do host a book podcast where I have been leading a book club with my friend Tyler to go through the Wheel of Time books. And so we do 2 chapters per week. We started about 3 years ago, but all the episodes are available. So if anybody thinks I'm kind of interesting, but they'd like to hear me like not be a know-it-all, but really know nothing, that's a great place to hear me like ask the silly questions and not really know what's going on as I learn my way through another fandom. And it's a pretty interesting book series. So that's called Through the Glass Columns, wherever you get your fine podcasts, such as Podcast Stardust. So thanks to you both. It was a pleasure as always.
Oh, thank you, Greg.
All right. Well, with that, we'll just go ahead and remind you all that we're available on whatever podcatchers that you listen to, and you haven't subscribed to the show already, please consider doing so. And we'd appreciate your ratings and reviews wherever you listen to your podcast. If you want to find our entire back catalog of shows, one of the best places you can do that is over at retrozap.com, and you can discover all the other great shows I got on the network over there. Jay, you want to go ahead and share our social media contacts and where else we can be found online?
You got it. So you can find all of our transmissions on Facebook and Instagram at Podcast Stardust. And we do maintain some Pinterest boards. And we also have our 2 YouTube outlets. So we have our traditional YouTube as well as YouTube Music, which do support interactions as well as subscriptions. So please head over to both of those, like, subscribe, and share those out. We do appreciate it. And if you are in need of a closet refresh or just want some new swag, you can head over to our TeePublic store. The link for that will be in our show notes. So you can sport your Podcast Stardust goodness all over your neck of the galaxy. And if you do pick something up, please tag us. We'd love to see where it ends up. Once again, the link to that is in our show notes.
All right. Upcoming on the show on Friday, we'll be getting into the week's Star Wars news. And then on Monday, we will be getting into the second episode of Lego Rebuild the Galaxy Pieces of the Past. So with that having been said, thanks for listening to episode 946 of Podcast Stardust, everyone. Have a great rest of your week. And until next time, may the Force